All right, everybody, welcome to our study today. And what we're going to do is, right now I'm in a coffee shop, so I'm to speak a little softer. But what we're going to do is go through our part 2 of Introduction into the Plays. Now this is chapter 15, in which it's really important to get the context of chapter 16. So chapter 15 is this very important kind of context that it's building. So that's what we want to do is just look at the context. So I just want to say hello to everybody. And so like I said, sorry if I'm speaking a little softer. I'm at a coffee place right now. I'm not at home. All right. So what we're going to do in going over the introduction. Hey, Sister Ashley. What we're going to do in going through the part 2 of the introduction of the 7 last plagues is the context of what we've been talking about all throughout Revelation. That is the the covenant scheme that's been through it. It's the idea that these are deeds, these are covenants. This is something in which now old obsolete contracts are going to be swallowed up, and then he's bringing in the everlasting gospel. And so that's the context. So we had last time looked at Exodus chapter 15 and the Song of Moses. And then so what we're going to do is the kind of the parallel to that is in Deuteronomy 32. And that's a song. Now, what I would say is as homework for this on your own kind of time, that you go back and actually read chapter 31 of Deuteronomy. So, but we're getting to 32 because that's the actual kind of the, I don't want to say the song, because everything that preceded that is the Song of Moses too in chapter 31. Chapter 31 is where he's saying, okay, this is my last statement to you. This is my last, and he's laying out the legal reality of this. And then so what you're going to see is the, now the fruit of that, he's going to get into the poem or the actual song itself, and that's chapter 32. But also, if you want to get an inspired commentary on it and a paraphrase coming from, hey, Brother Jesse, good to see you, is actually Isaiah 34. So we're going to read that too. So basically all our notes are today are just going to be Deuteronomy 32 and Isaiah 34. And we're going to kind of run that side by side, and that's going to give us those dimensions. You have to understand, something doesn't just repeat itself somewhere else. Like, let's say if something's being written in the Song of Moses is being sung in Exodus 15, to read it in Deuteronomy 32 is not the same thing. It's giving you a more robust revelation of it. And then you have, excuse me, Isaiah 34, which is even more, and it's not going to sound exactly the same, but you will see it's going to hit some parallel points, and it's adding more richness, more insight, more context. And you're going to see that that's what John is doing. John is actually looking at the ever-developing revelation, then he's just building on it. And so, you know, for us, that would be the culmination of all the different revelations. And that's what he's doing. He's layering all the various references on top of each other and giving us the robust meaning. And that's what it says in, like, for example, 1 Corinthians chapters 9 and 10, where it says that these things were written more for our time than for even their time. And so the buildup or the context of something going around again and around again throughout the history of the children of Israel, the picture is that there's an every time around, there's an ever gathering richness, more riches. Every time they cycle around, the idea of Semek is a circle, but the idea of a year cycle is Shana. So it's the idea of going around, and each time you go around, it's like understanding something. Yeah, you understand it, but I don't know if you've ever feel like, man, I'm going through the same life lessons all the time. I feel like I'm never learning anything because they seem to be the same thing. Well, if you think in a Western linear way, you think you're not learning something, but not in the biblical way, God's way, where he's all saying, no, you're going to go through it again, but you're going to gain more nuance, more richness, more insight. And it's the idea of going around and round and round, where you're starting to carve an engraving or to circumcise, or it's the idea of the more you go around and round and round, it's the idea of how you will go round and round and round in your thoughts or in your understanding. And then you have a richer, deeper. So to go one time through something, well, each time you should go through, the second time, the third, you should gain a little bit more, and have a richer, deeper association with it, along with gathering more information. And that's what it is of the Song of Moses. You don't just go to Exodus 15, say, okay, I know the Song of Moses. Well, how is it being repeated in the next song, in Deuteronomy? I'll read a little bit of 31 as an introduction to it, and then 32 is the actual song. And then how is Isaiah 34? And there's more. I'm just giving you kind of, pointing in directions of Bible study to kind of stimulate the understanding. But that's the point of Revelation, is we are to actually go over Genesis, go over Deuteronomy, go over Judges, go over Ruth, go over Esther, go over the Psalms, go over the prophets, go over the minor prophets, over and over with these things in mind. And each time around, we're gathering more insight. And that is what we have the privilege of doing now. We have so many Bible study tools, so many resources to access, that we can just do that. So you read it, and you might gain just a little bit more each time, but each time you go around, you gain a deeper and richer insight. And that's how you become settled and grounded in the truth. That's how you become sealed, or that's how you become settled into something, established. It's the idea of like shaking and packing something in. So it's really important that this is what we're doing right now, that we're doing this kind of going around and getting more insights. So when you read like something like Revelation 15, you're reading it more than how you would maybe when you initially learned about it. But now, as you keep going through, and every time that you go through, let's say Deuteronomy 32 or Deuteronomy in general or something like that, you're going to be thinking of the book of Revelation. You're going to be thinking about what Isaiah might be saying and how that's a commentary on the Song of Moses. And as they keep going through these experiences, there is reflection on the writing of Moses, and then there's commentary. And that's what the prophets basically were. They were just commentaries on application to the covenant law and the idea of how to relate to the laws of Moses in such a way that you would say, oh, okay, well, they're accessing these legal ideas, and they are basically warning how you are outside of covenant. And so that's the whole thing. The entire emphasis of all of this is whether or not you're in covenant. In fact, John is very clear about the concept of covenant, because if you go through actually the book of 1 John, and I don't know if you've recently read 1 John, but what is interesting is how it's written. That should be a big clue as to what's going on there. It's completely written as a legal document. It's completely laid out. It's all about laws and commandments and how you're in that covenant or not. So he'll address the entire body, people as little children. Then he'll say, you fathers, you sons. He goes through this whole process of classifying everyone under the concept of children. And children were always those that were under a covenant, under an oath, well, under an entire breakdown of an inheritance. And then everyone that was under the inheritance were called children. So those were also legal terms. And so this is very fascinating to know. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's get into Deuteronomy a little bit here. And let's look at our context. Let's see here. Present to everyone. All right, let me kind of expand this a little bit. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back one chapter a little bit just to do this. Okay, so let's see here. So the reason I'm just going here is just, let's just start with the very last verse. It says, then Moses spoke in the hearing of all the assembly of Israel the words of this song until they were ended. And here's your semicolon here. So let's go to that next chapter. So right here it says in Deuteronomy 32, it says what? Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak. And hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. Now, right now, you already have the Shema. And it's the idea of This is a covenant, and you're gonna be in hearing of it. It's like a summons or anything else, or even when a judge, when you're in court, when he says, "Do you understand the charges that are brought against you?" And so that's the idea, that you're going to hear and understand. So what's the word I'm looking for? You are understanding, and in the hearing of something or in the understanding of something, you are now entering into a sense of accountability to it. In other words, culpability if you're in violation. Basically, the question is this: let me kind of do this for a quick sec. Basically, the question is going to be: did you understand what was being told to you? Did you comprehend it? And so that's the idea of hearing. And hearing should be a blessing and a benefit, because if you're listening in court, it's the idea of, like, we're reading to you the the inheritance. So do you understand it? Do you understand the terms? Do you understand the blessings? Do you understand what you're going to get here? And so it'd be like everyone's sitting down, and there's a lawyer, and he opens up a will, the reading of a will, and everyone's sitting around there thinking about, okay, what did I get in the will? And that's the basic idea that's going on here. It's a shema. It's a hear. It's the idea, again, is it something you can process and understand? And that's what you're doing, is that eternal life and living before God throughout all of eternity is a picture of a covenant. It's a picture of a contract and agreement that you become under that house, that this is a household, or this is a tent that you're entering into, and that you're all going to be called children. You're all going to be called sons. All the language is familial. It's all family language. So he would be called your father. Christ would be called your brother. You call one another brothers and sisters. You see, it's not just like a social term. It's covenantal, familial terms. Everything has to be because you're part of the family. Every benefit, every blessing is because you're part of the family and considered a part of the family by blood. So how do you do that legally when you're not of, quote, literal blood? Well, the blood was something that would ratify a contract. So by that blood, by the blood of something that ratified or that was shed or something, it's the idea of, that the loss of that creature's life was there, but also that blood was sprinkled or spread, or it applied to you. So blood was applied. And so it's the idea of continuing the bloodline through an irony. The irony was the sacrifice of the being, but in this blood of sprinkling, that's why I call it by the idea of sprinkling. It's the idea of a good conscience. In other words, that you can be assured that if you had that, quote, application to you, that extended to you, that it was the idea of you being a part of blood. You're part of the guilt of that blood too, on the other end of it. Let's say you murder somebody. Or if you murder somebody, you get their blood splashed upon you, and the forensic evidence reads that, well, what is that person's blood doing attached to you? You're guilty of the shedding of that blood, because why is it under your fingernails? Why is it on your socks? Why was it on your sweatshirt? This type of thing. So it's a very important thing to understand that it's a blessing and a curse. It's going to be a great blessing because you're under all of the benefits and all of the transfer of inheritance that comes from the blood, but you're also, when in violation, under the guilt of the shedding of that blood. So it was a very solemn thing to enter into covenant. And that's what this idea of a song is. This song is the idea, are those that are going to be the beneficiaries of that covenant. They sing a celebration song that, that this is something that we're recipients of. So, all right, without further ado, let's go to the song of Deuteronomy. Excuse me for speaking such soft tones. I'm in a coffee place. Usually I'm speaking really loud so everyone can hear me. All right, it says, give ear, O heavens, and I will speak. Hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. This is that covenant language talking about. So let my teaching or my doctrine, or it's the idea of, these are all legal words here, drop as the rain. So remember, when it says it rains on the just and on the unjust, it's the idea of it's available to all, this covenant, just like rain is. My speech, distill as the dew. In other words, everyone will be blessed by this. And the rain drops on the tender earth as showers on the grass. Now, you notice here that in the reception of this, it immediately refers to the blessing of the rain, blessing of the Holy Spirit, blessing of the latter rain. And the Holy Spirit's what? Representation of a down payment of this covenant. For I proclaim the name of the Lord, ascribe greatness to our God. Now remember, we talked about the idea of a family name, or that this is all family. All salvation, all contract, all covenant is a family reality. It's just, you can't put it any simpler than that. It's a family reality. So, for I proclaim the name of the Lord, by no other name, which by we must be saved. There's only one house, one family, in which there will reside salvation. That's why everything else was considered hostile or an adversarial relationship to God. And you'll notice that all the, quote, families that surrounded the children of Israel were considered enemies, even though they were at one point relatives, right? But they had disassociated themselves because they went outside of covenant. He is the rock. His work is perfect. For all his ways are justice, a God of truth, without injustice, righteous and upright is he. So as you remember, when you go back to chapter 15 in the book of Revelation, it's talking about the idea that he alone is holy. Thou alone are holy. It's the idea that he's the righteous covenantor, and he's the righteous one that perfected the covenant and ratified the covenant, and the entire covenant is going to rest upon his shoulders. That's the important picture that's going on here. He's trying to say that he's the rock, he's the very thing that's established upon, and his work is perfect. I want to make sure you notice that in Deuteronomy 32. It's in contrast to our work. That's why on the Day of Atonement, the last thing that you can do is present the work of your hands. You cannot present your works. You cannot present even your sanctification as the means or the approach to God. You have to come through the sacrifice of another, his work, something that he accomplished in himself. The whole point of the Three Angels message is the everlasting gospel, the everlasting covenant. The better promises that were fulfilled in someone who did an infinitely better job of meeting all the requirements of the covenant, which was Christ. He had the entire weight of perfection, the expectation and the obligation of perfection upon him. If he failed at any point, none of us have any hope. So when he's talking about his work, he's not just talking about creation or talking about, all these other ideas. He's talking about the work that he has done to make all the preparations for covenant fulfillment. That's what's important to really understand here, is that when they're talking about his work is perfect, he's talking about the idea of the work of preparing and doing everything to make provision. So there was a perfect ratification and a perfect fulfillment of it. And that is why he is called the rock. Everything is established upon his work that he has accomplished in himself. Let's go back, you guys. All right. We're trying to cover some ground, and that's why I'm kind of moving through this. And then I have a lot more commentary, but I want to make sure I catch these verses. Okay. All right. So it says, they have corrupted themselves. They are not his children. You see the whole children thing. Because of their blemish, a perverse and crooked generation. And some of those outside that covenant, right? Do you thus deal with the Lord, O foolish and unwise people? Now, remember, the idea of Christ coming, the people that were likened to two parties, right? You had the wise and the foolish virgins. And so right here is really accessing, and when Christ is talking about that in, I think it's Matthew 25, he's talking about these two parties, because in the end, everything is divided into two parties. There's the goat and the sheep. There's the sons of Cain and the sons of Abel. There's the foolish and there's the wise. So, here we go. Is he not your what? Father. That was a big thing, the idea of the familial, the idea that you're under his tent, that you're legally his, that he could look upon you. and say, this is my beloved child in whom I'm well pleased. Well, how does he do that? He does that for what we are hidden in Christ, in our Goel, in the one that has gone before us and stands as our champion, or as our representative. That's why he's called Israel. He went to battle with the cosmic Goliath, which was Satan and is Satan, and he went in battle. So we could stand as a child of God in a perfect filler of the covenant expectations because of what we are in Christ. So we hide and we present ourselves before him, and we bring all of our supplications to God in Christ's name. It's not just a lucky charm thing or say, oh, I'm just coming in Jesus' name, so he's going to have to bless it. No, it's all saying, for his purpose, for his kingdom, for his glory, for, reflecting his image or whatever it is, but when you're coming in Christ's name, you're coming with all of that in mind, that you're coming to spread or to expand the borders or to expand the tent. That's the idea. You're doing it for his glory. And what is the glory? What's the purpose of God? Well, to have more children, to be fruitful and multiply with the gospel. And so anything you do in his name to spreading the gospel, for people to have a revelation of him, will he honor that? Absolutely, because he's a father who desires, and his great joy is for him to have offspring or fruit from his loins. And the loins, believe it or not, if you're a presenter of the gospel, you present people with eternal life in Christ, you are a part of basically spreading the idea of the loins, or the covenant that God begets people from. And that's why the word of God is called the seed of God. It says, has he not made you? Has he not made you and established you? In other words, it's a double blessing here. The idea of by creation and by what? Redemption. In other words, the idea of Sabbath is he made you, and the idea of Sabbath is that he has delivered you from Egypt, or has redeemed you. So it's a double portion, or it's a double blessing, or there's a double application. Just like Babylon's fallen is fallen, there's the literal falling and the spiritual falling, or it's the idea of something having a double portion. We'll figure out what that means. We'll talk a little more about it in other studies. It says, remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask your what? Father, and he will show you, your elders, and he will tell you. Basically, these are people supposed to be, that are ahead of you in the gospel, sharing with you kind of what we have in Christ. That, like what we're doing right now. This is when the Most High divided the inheritance to the nations, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the boundaries of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. In other words, there's this dividing point. There is those who fall under covenant. Before that, there is I shouldn't say before that, but there's a process that goes on in which there is the calling. And from the calling, it's the idea of calling sheep, or it's the idea that you're calling out, and then people who desire to be a part of that covenant will be called like sheep of that fold. So it's the idea, if you're going to respond, if you're not going to harden your heart, if you're going to respond to the opportunity that is presented to you that day, just like real quick, I'll talk to you guys about this. Just like the thief on the cross, he saw who he was, saw that God's fulfilling ratification through blood of a covenant, and he wants to join. And he says, remember me, put my list on the registry. And he says, I tell you today. So it's not, I tell you today, you'll be with me in paradise. He says, I'm going to tell you today. That was a major, major covenant language there, in the hearing of today. And that's what you see in the book of Hebrews, where it's talking about while it's yet today. That's very familiar language with them. It's the idea that there's an opportunity that is there, that you have in the hearing of the gospel, that you don't have under anything else. Because what do you have? Well, you have the Godhead that is there to ratify this covenant. So you have the Holy Spirit that is there to give great power. Remember, this whole song started out with the idea of dew and rain and blessing. And then comes from that is the idea of a rock where it's been established. And so all of this is presented before you as an assurance of something that you can have by the hearing. Hear, O Israel. Hear the words of my voice. And it's the idea of is it a hard thing? Is it far from you? And he says, no, it's near. It's as close as the hearing of your ear. It's a reception, a yes and amen. Amen. Yes, I agree. I wish to be established with that. And so this is the idea of entering into a covenant, that you're in the hearing of it. and that you're never more, it's never more opportunistic than the moment that you're in the hearing and the call of it. So that's the idea of a call, and that's what you're going to hear and see in the whole earth filled with the glory of God, the outpouring of the latter rain. It's the idea of a last call in that way. It's really sad that you're going to reference going to a bar in your mind for that, but you know, a club or something. All right, let's go ahead and let's go back to our text. All right. Okay, let's go a little further into this. For the Lord's portion is his people. In other words, this is what makes him happy. You got to think of God as a father that wants a bunch of kids and as many kids as he can get, because that is his quote portion. That is his reward. That is the prize for him. It's not that he gets anything else. He doesn't get an earth. He makes a new heaven and earth. Everything else gets replaced. Everything else is washed away. This is something that's more of a picture of the reward that he gets. It's something he can't ever duplicate, and that is a person that could be in a covenant of free will after they've had an experience, a life experience, traveling and traversing through a world of sin, a world of desert, a world of decay and declension and deception. And so, and then to hear a revelation of him through this process and to respond to it and to fight the battle of faith while there's a veil yet over them. The idea of this is a very unique, I don't want to say branding process, but a jewel making process. That's why he calls his people his peculiar treasures, or it's the idea of a jewel. In fact, the word Jew or jewel, they're the same origin. It's the idea that you become the praise of God, that a people without seeing him will hear his voice, and even without immediate reward would live a life of suffering and hardship, because God has presented himself in such a way that even through tough circumstances, they trust in his character, or in the idea of his name, who he is, just like Job did. Right? The Lord gives, the Lord takes away, but blessed be that what? That name, that character, who he is. I trust him even though my perceptions can't fully comprehend, but I know at the core of my being, the heart of my hearts, or something you would say. I know who he is, and I can entrust myself unto him, even as Job says, unto death. Though he slay me, yet will I do what? I'll trust him. I'll love him. I'll put my well-being into his hands, even though I am experiencing a great dread of even the grave. All right, so Jacob is the place of his inheritance, which is fascinating to get into all the deep stuff of this. Jacob means deceiver or heel. Remember, he'll bruise his heel, Jacob. And that's the idea that of even tracking somebody's, when you're a tracker and you're tracking somebody's footprints through the wilderness, all the Native American trackers and stuff like this, they would track the heel. And it's the idea of following in the tracks of somebody. But it's also, you can trip somebody up from that point. It's the idea of being someone that will trip somebody up at the very last moment. Or that's where you get the idea all throughout Scripture, the idea of reversals. Like something looks like it's going one way, but at the last minute, it goes a whole nother way. It's like the rich man and Lazarus story. That would be a Yaakov. That would be a heel catcher. It's the idea. We would call it like a twist in the story, or something like that. Well, at the last minute, there's a reversal in the whole thing. What looked like was going to be one thing turned out to be another. What looked like was going to be a slaughter for the Jews when they leave Egypt turns out to be something where, in the end, God prevails over a Pharaoh and the Egyptian armies, right? And so that's the idea. It looks like that the righteous are going to be destroyed and slain at the end of time, but he comes in as a Yaakov, as a heel catcher. That he will bite your heel, but you'll bruise his head. And I hope you kind of see that picture, that you can, in the end, trust him. Because what happens? That Yaakov turns into a Israel, an overcomer. Does that make sense now? So you are changed. You yourself have to see your own ability to self-deceive, to be manipulative, to be weak and helpless, just like Jacob was. And he had deceived his father in order to get the blessings and the birthright. And when he wrestled with the angel, what did he have to admit? The angel says, "What is your name?" He says, "My name is Yaakov. My name is heel catcher, a person who deceives." And he says, "Well, you're no longer, ironically, Yaakov, but you're Israel." And so the children of God go through a ordeal of testing in that way. And we go on. It says, he found him in a desert land, in the wasteland, a howling wilderness. He encircled him. Now, this is huge language. This is marriage language. This is the idea of when you encircle somebody. It's why, yes, the ancients would wear rings and stuff like that. It's the idea of circling something. That's what I'm talking about. Understanding something in your mind. You're going through, and you're going through, and you're going through. Circling in your mind. It's the idea that this is something that you are remembering. You're memorializing. You're going through. These are promises that you have. They're precious to you. You cherish them. And so something that is the idea of guarding something. You know, if you're guarding something, if it's very precious to you, you circle it as a guard. You stand watch. And so it says he instructed him. That's because you care about his outcome, like any child, right? You know, you give him a schoolmaster, and that schoolmaster leads him and chases him and corrects him and comforts him and guides him until he's able to handle the inheritance. And so that's what that picture is. It's the idea that if you cherish something, you're going to discipline, you're going to disciple, you're going to instruct, you're going to chastise, you're going to work because, are you ready for this? Because you are the apple of the inheritance king's eye. And a lot of people have got into this whole idea, the apple, the pupil, the little person, that he's so close to you, that it's the idea that you're so close to your teacher that you could see your reflection in his eye. And it's the idea of intimacy or following your instructor very closely. So he says he instructed him and kept him as the apple of his eye. So this is the idea of the teacher taking great care over, as a shepherd, over those that he's watching over. So verse 11 says, as what? Now this is a very interesting, I always quote this actually when I'm kind of going through a Hebraic, Paleolithic Hebrew kind of thing. I always go through all this stuff to this verse right here to show as an eagle stirs up its nest. And the word nest here is the word jealous. And this is the whole point of the apple of his eye. As an eagle stirs up its nest, and that's the word jealous. So how is the word, real quick, nest and jealous the same word, but it's the idea of circling something. It's the idea of taking the edges of your wings and putting it over something and say, I will protect it with my life. I'll shade, I'll cover, I'll watch over. And so that's what that is. It's the idea of all the activity that happens around a nest is how he thinks towards you and me. It's not just the idea, of a nest. It's the idea of, well, what does a nest represent? It represents the idea of the activity, the behavior, the jealousy, the protection that happens all around that nest. You know, it's the cradle of your life, and in which, you know, at some point, God will even get you out of that nest and give you wings. And that's what basically the end game for the plan of salvation is, that it gives us our wings. I remember when I was in the Navy, and you have to do all this stuff to earn your golden wings, and it's a big deal that in the end they give you your wings, and you've got your wings, you've got your gold wing. Well, that's the idea. We're going through all this discipline and stuff here. The idea of you're getting your wings, the idea that, okay, you're no longer under the discipline or the training that you need to head a household. But now you have children, you have a wife, you have your land, you have all the riches, and now you are the patriarch, or you're the head of that household. Yeah, it's like getting your wings. Now, you know, but right now we're under the wings of somebody else. We're under the care of somebody else. You know, right now we're ambassadors, children and ambassadors. But beyond that, we're under his wings and under his care. Okay, let's go back to what we're talking about. I said sorry for the soft voice just in public. There's just people around trying to have conversation. So let's see. He hovers over its young, spreading out its wings, taking them up and carrying them on his wings. Wow. Huge covenant picture here. And the word wings is the border of the garment. So when the woman who's issuing blood, or Ruth, is coming under the covering of the border of someone's garment, God calls like his land, like the borders. And when you're inside the borders, you're under his wings, you're under his protection, you're under his care. And really this idea of coming under someone else's care was so severe that look how Lot cared for those two angels, or he even threw his daughters out and said, but it's the idea, it's radical, it's a radical hospitality. So when somebody, quote, takes you up and puts you under their wings, it's the idea that it's to the total sacrifice of everything. So it says in verse 12, it says, so the Lord led him. Now this is huge here. It's the idea of singularity. You have a single disciple, that there is one that you're looking over. And he didn't hand it off to somebody else to do. So it says the Lord alone led him, and there was no foreign God with him. That is huge. This is personal. This is personal service. This is individualized training and guiding and leading, because it's the idea of, now this is a general covenant. Now real quick, okay. This is the picture we got to get a hold of. God is talking to us collectively, and he's talking to us as if he's talking to the entire body of his family. But the subtext that's happening here, the meta, as I've been referring to lately, the meta message, the message, there is one in that crowd that he's talking to fundamentally. It's the champion. It's the Goel. It's the one that's going to show up in the Jordan. Now, obviously, this was Christ referring to himself. He's talking about that he made an oath and he would fulfill these things, and that he will come as, and he will basically relinquish his position, and then now put everything on hold, only for it to be handed back to him, no longer as strictly Yahweh, but he's going to come back and earn this covenantal standing as being the mingled God. He's going to be mingled, his divinity will be mingled with humanity, that he can rightfully represent humanity, and it could be applied in a exhaustless way to whomsoever. So they'll never run out of supply because of his divine nature. But the fact that men have access to it, he's fully man. And so what does that mean? It means that he is built that way for humanity, but he will stand as the Goel. He himself will subjugate himself as the representative, the champion of humanity. So he's talking to a particular person who is representing the entire offspring in that way. But he's also speaking to us as if we're born from his loins, and therefore we're under that covenant. So he's trying to get us to take it personally, all of this stuff, but at the same time, fundamentally, primarily, it's talking about what was obtained in Christ, the reality of him coming and being the sole, the entire government will rest upon his shoulders. It will be him that will come in and champion the cause. And so he will be called, quote, in a legal sense, the Son. And so the idea of him being the only begotten, the Son, is all legal language. It's not trying to talk about biological or cosmic birth language. It's talking about the legal language. He's going to be the begotten, the Son, the inheritor. This is the idea. And it's going to be God. The Father will be like, I will watch over you personally. This is, as I said, a subtext also reaching over and saying, talking about how this will be fulfilled. And his nickname, he got nicknamed in, I think, verse 2 as the Rock. All right, let's go back to our text. I said, I'm sorry, I'm talking so low tone, guys. This is, now, if I were in nature, I would be yelling in my usual loud tones. All right, let's see here. Verse 13 says, and then he made him ride in the heights of the earth. In other words, this is the idea of chariots, okay? And the same thing with Ezekiel, he's talking about the chariots. This is the transport of royalty. And he might eat the produce of the fields. These are all people that are head of the workers in the field, that because it's their kingdom, it's their monarchy. And so, it's the idea of being in a privileged place. He'll eat the produce of his fields. He made him draw honey from the rock and oil from the flinty rock. Now, this is clear reference to a Mashiach, a Messiah, one in which exudes oil. And so that's why it's also very fascinating, if you don't mind me just touch on this real quick, is that it was prophetically significant that he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, which means what? An oil press. And it's the idea that he's going to be dried out. He's going to be squeezed or pressed, in which it's the idea of the oil being squeezed out of something. Now think of the profoundness of that. He is called the Mashiach, the Messiah. And it's the idea he's the very fountain of that oil. What does that even mean? It means that he is going to be treated as the dried up, detestable object that has no moisture, that has no life. That's why he's up on Calvary's cross and he's also saying, I thirst. And it's the idea of being dried out. It's the idea that he is now under and you have to understand the training was out in the wilderness. They brought him into thirst, brought him into the sense of, hey, you're being rejected of God. You're being separated for destruction. You were led out to the wilderness like a scapegoat. And so like an Azazel. And so that was a very fascinating process for him to go through that as a training. So if you're wondering why you're going through certain things, and people are saying, well, you're just going through training. You're going, yeah, but training for what? Well, you might be selected for the grand stage, 144,000, and the eschatological grand events at the end of time is the ultimate stage. That's the NFL. That's showtime, and everything else is just Samek or Shana. It's just training. We're just circling around until we get really good at it. That when it's like rounds in the Navy doing search and rescue, we practice rescues endlessly, going through the procedures endlessly. There was the whole 22 steps that you go through called ICIC, in close, in control. Then you go through those 22 steps. You're going through it all the time. That by the time you're jumping out of the helicopter and you're going through the procedures, you're like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Samek. You're going around. And so when you're in the actual scenario, you're not obeying your adrenaline. You're obeying your training. You're not obeying the awesomeness of the circumstances. You're trained. And so all of this, the idea of to be discipled, the idea of to be trained, to be brought through this process is very, very important. So if he loves you and you're recipient to the covenant, he's going to bring you around and carve into you these principles and these ideas. So anyway, so when Christ himself is now headed for the cosmic stage of the offering, the sacrifice, he goes into what's called Gethsemane. He's going to press all the oil out, all the assurance that he, it's his core nature is being pressed down in this way. He's being dried out. He's being prepared to be the object in which he'd be the recipient of rejection and wrath. And so he had to go by naked faith and not by even his own idea that he is the Mashiach. He's the source of the fountain. So it's very profound when you look at kind of what he went through. All right. Let me go on. Verse 14, it says, curds from the cattle, milk from the flock, with the fat of lambs, the rams of the breed of Bashan, which was, the word Bashan is really the area of, there was a very dark, sandy soil in Bashan, and things just grew awesome there, and everything, including the cattle, because even in the grain and in the things that the animals ate, they grew up because of all the nutrients in Bashan. So Bashan was a very sandy, dark, rich soil where everything just grew and became strong. If it were the plants, if it were the animals, whatever they were, they grew and huge. It's almost like they were on super steroids or something. As the rams, the breed of Bashan, the goats, the choicest wheat, and you drink wine, the blood of the grapes. This is just talking about the curds. Remember, that's what Abraham had prepared, the curd or the yogurt for Christ and the two angels and the milk. And then, they slew the fatted calf in this way. It's the idea of entering into a taste of the inheritance and to have the choicest things. And that was always a picture that you got the first, That's why tithe was given to the head of the family or whatever. It's the idea of that was an acknowledgement of who would have the first, who would have the best, who would have the highest caliber. It was an acknowledgement to the head of the family this way. He's all saying, you're treated like the head of the family. And you'll see the amazing picture that that's going to be when you're going to be the rejoicing of angels because of the fact that you're the bride. You're the bride of the king. But Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. Grew fat and kicked. You grew fat. You grew thick. You are a beast. Then he therefore forsook God, who had made him, and scorned and esteemed the rock of scornfully esteemed the rock of their salvation. Now this is why we go through challenges here, and it seems like it's a depravity. So what's the idea of Jeshurun? Jeshurun is like the idea of those that are in right standing with God. And so you receive the assurance and the blessing, but that was the whole sin of presumption. I'll touch on this real quick. So sometimes when you have everything and you don't have to work for it anymore, like in Sodom and Gomorrah, you start to presume upon God's grace, upon how much room you might have to neglect something. And so you start to hold on very loosely to things. You start to esteem them very lowly because of an entitled mentality. And if our generation is anything today, it is a Jeshurun, growing fat and kicked and grew thick and obese and became scornful and esteemed things very, very lowly. They never had to work for it. They didn't understand what it cost to provide all of this. And then there's this mentality. So why would the adversary advocate such a mentality in these last days? Because more people are going to be destroyed by entering into the mentality of Jeshurun, to the presumption, to the idea that I can, my grace is always going to be held out for me forever. There's never going to be a cutoff point. I deserve it because I'm better. It's fascinating. They did a study where these are people that knew what was going on. They consciously went into this study, and it was a study that did this. It told people saying this, that we are going to give you all the advantages in this board game, and we're going to give these other people these massive disadvantage. And so as you enter into this game, you're most likely going to win, and they are most likely going to lose. So you're given this advantage. So what had happened? All these people that were given the advantage versus those that had a disadvantage in that game started speaking amongst themselves as if, yeah, always in my life, I always knew that I was something special. I was different than everyone else. And they started having this narrative about them, this dialogue about I'd always deserved this. There's always been people that were less than me, and I always knew it, and I always knew I had a special place in this life. And it's a culture or mentality of this self-esteem, this entitled mentality. And then they started to scornfully treat these other people and acting as if they were actually stupider than them. And they started bonding because people were friends. So while the friends were being chosen on different sides, they were starting to destroy the friendship that they had naturally and start to bond with these people that were given all of this advantage in this board game. So that's the idea. Sometimes even God himself will say, hey, listen, when I give you an advantage, it is not for you to become this spoiled brat that is fat, dumb, and happy, spiritually speaking. You become pretentious. You become arrogant. You become somebody that starts seeing yourself as perfectly entitled. And then you get into the mentality of Sodom and Gomorrah. So at some point, you could get so bad that God himself even likened his people in Ezekiel 16 to Sodom and Gomorrah. He will liken his own people. Because you have such an advantage, you have a problem of humility. You have a problem of understanding what it cost to give you all of this. Think about it. So why don't we get everything when we want it right now, because there might be a bigger monster creeping behind us that gets us into a disposition of arrogance and self-contentment, where you are no longer somebody that is in the awe and in the fear of God, and you've lost that real distinction of how holy he is and how unholy we are, how he didn't deserve what he got and we don't deserve what we get, but because of great love, because of great sacrifice on one that was infinitely able to assess the cost, versus those who are dead and deadened in fatness and ignorance and sin and all the corrosiveness and all the tunnel vision that we have, that even though they won't appreciate what I do for them after they receive this great salvation. The whole idea is that we grow in our great appreciation, that we understand with greater revelation. Hey, Gavin. So this is what happens in those that are become like Jeshurun. Look up what the word Jeshurun means, and it should mean basically the upright ones that are in right standing with God. And because of that, they've fallen into presumption. It's a terrible, terrible mistake, and it's the easiest mistake in the world to make, but it's going to ruin more people than probably gross sin. So they what? Scornfully, in other words, with a despising mentality, treated lightly, esteem the rock of salvation. So they provoked him to what? Jealousy. Now this is very fascinating. With foreign gods. What does that even mean? With abominations that provoked him to anger. Well, God says that I cover you as a bird covers its chicks, wings that are around the circle of the nest, and that I'm going to intensely protect you. And one time when I was taking a walk in Monterey during the time of mating season for these birds, what was happening is that I was being dive bombed by these birds as I was walking by. And they're drunk, and what's interesting is during this mating time too, they'll eat berries and stuff that are out at this time, and they actually get drunk, and they will fly into windows and hurt their little beaks and stuff like this, because it's a time of great passion and drunkenness for these animals when they're in mating season, and the breaking forth of the covenant and inviting people to the gospel, and the fountain of blood is open, and the Holy Spirit is being released out. It is considered like a time of the turtle dove, the time of the mating, the time of, great drunkenness for God, because it's a very passionate reality. So he says that they provoked him to the word nest, as that we looked about earlier on. It's the word kana. Now, what's also fascinating about that word kana or kanan, Q-N, is where you get the word kun, K-Q-N, Canaan, to obtain, to possess. And that's where that word comes from. It's the idea of Canaan land was like, this is to have, this is to obtain, this is to possess. And there's a certain ownership of desire, wanting. It's the object of your desire. Heaven is Canaan land. It is the object of our desire. It's what we desire. It's what we crave for. We hunger. We think about it. We find our rest. We won't get there until we get into that rest, and we enter into that rest. And if anything is there to destroy that rest, just as the Israelites went into the Canaan land, we're there to do battle with the restlessness of the turbulent sea people that were there, the restless sea people that kept it a land where it was never at rest. And so once you remove that, and everything's become settled, God's people were likened unto a serene a body of water. It's the idea of peaceful waters, of quiet waters. So when you see turbulent fellowship, or you see people that are in currents that are smashing against each other, and the waves and the turbulence that are there, such as the disciples were sitting on the boat, and they experienced that. And so Christ was trying to get them to work together. And so they did. So he's sleeping in the bow of the boat, and they're all working together. And he's trying to say, hey, listen, this is the point, is that it is the wicked that are likened unto a troubled sea, and they're never at rest. And so God's whole purpose is to bring us through ordeals. So in the end, that we find the futility that we should learn from it, and the idea of the conflict and clashing, and the idea that we're in in a adversarial battle zone with God himself, and there is never going to be rest in the kingdom of God. And he's trying to bring us to resolution, to resolve ourselves that we want to enter into safe shores with God. We want to enter in peacefully with God. I hope you're kind of seeing that. All right. Okay, we're going to go back. Let's see here. So it provokes him what? With foreign gods. Now, this is a sad thing. We talk about foreign gods. It's the idea with other lovers. Other lovers. Man, this is terrible. It's the idea of we provoke him to jealousy because he sees us as his. We're his Canaan. We're his Canaan. We're his possession. We're the object of his desire. And so the idea of conquering the enemies that are in Canaan land is talking about how God is to conquer his enemies that are in the Canaan land of our own restless soul. It's so important. I really want to repeat that. When they went into Canaan land, that represented something. That represented a reality that exists even within the people of God. That there is a restlessness that needs to be overcome. Are you getting a hold of that? So it's a work of the Holy Spirit to bring us to conflict with ourselves. Talk about this for a second. To bring us into conflict, and then there we take what the promises of God that he would subdue, and that we are to enter into manfully to face certain things, to face something face to face, to see those enemies, and then God comes in with the covenant promise that he will occupy that land. And that's what he wants. He wants us to willfully vomit out or to cast out those that are not in deed covenant with him. And so he can occupy the land peacefully. It's a city without walls. It's the idea of a circumcision, that the covering of the flesh is down. We're open and vulnerable to God entirely, that we have made ourselves utterly available to him, and that he has access. So when he speaks, just like Samuel, just like Moses, just like Abraham, when he speaks, what do they all say? Here I am. Here I am. I'm here. I'm totally available. When he speaks to Elijah, here I am. I'm here. When he speaks to Elisha, I'm here. When he speaks to Isaiah, I am here. You know, it's the idea of those that are his sheep of his flock. When he speaks, he eclipses, he trumps, he prevails over all other agendas that we have. He literally impeaches everything and preempts everything that we're doing at the time. God has given himself permission to interrupt what we're doing. That's why it says in the book of James, you know, hey, you make these plans and you're going to do such and such and go to such a city and sell and buy, make a certain amount of money. We're going to do this. But if you want to know if you're his, will he have preemptive privilege? When he speaks, do we find our ears pierced? In other words, are we bond servants? Have we found ourselves saying, oh, Master just spoke, sorry, I gotta go. I'm right in the middle of the conversation, Master says, gotta go. Right in the middle of plowing, the Master's calling. Hey, you know what? Time to even leave the plow. Christ came to his disciples and, you know, they're saying, you know, well, don't let the dead bury the dead. You know, because if you're outside of covenant with him, he's calling, you're not hearing his voice and you're not responding to it. What does that mean? You're certainly not a bondservant. You're not a part of the household. You haven't come under discipleship. You haven't been a part of the process of being the bondservant in which you're being trained. Bondservanthood was you stayed so close to the master that you know all of his business. Bondservants would go out and they'd be the ones that go to the market with the seal. They would go with the seal to the market, and the seal was the family seal. And so they would go and they would purchase and they would buy land and they would do business and they would be given the talents of gold or whatever to go out and to purchase. You guys know the parable, right? And so the master would send out the bondservants. Well, even the one guy says, well, I heard, you know, you're a cruel master. You know, get interest off things that you didn't, you know, I mean, you're getting benefits from things that you didn't earn anything. And he says, well, if you thought of me that way, then why did you go out and earn something, since I am this cruel master? And obviously I'll discipline and punish. He says, according to how you perceive me, you'll be judged in this way. Very fascinating thing to understand that he gives the seal, think about it, to those that are his bondservant, that they may go out and to do what? To spend the talents in an investment, gospel work, bringing people into the inheritance. What is the desire? What is he trying to do with his talent? Purchase souls. What is his portion? What is his reward? What is his treasure in the end? Souls that have heard and decided to join themselves to the household. He is the ultimate Schindler of Schindler's List. He is spending everything on getting as many people into his workshop, into his family, under his care, to deliver them from the death camps. Hope that makes sense. Okay. Let's go further on. Let's look at 17. He sacrificed the demons not to God. To gods they did not know. Okay, this is so fascinating, trust me. The gods they did not know, to new gods, to newfangled ideas, new arrivals that your fathers did not fear. Wow, that is so important. Because I remember a long time ago, I did this study called The Addiction to the New. And it's the idea, oh no, this is new, this is exciting, this is, you know, and it's the idea of chasing something, the proverbial carrot. We look like, you know, every single con, the word con comes from a confidence scheme. In other words, they are selling confidence. They're getting you to buy into them. And the idea of a deceiver, if you want to get into the kind of the ancient language motif, is someone who comes into town in a traveling show. They're a gypsy, or that's where you get the word gypsy from. It comes from the word Egyptians. And it's those that were passing through, and they were there to, like, they're selling something, or I have a new idea or a new whatever. Remember, there was even Paul, who was called, aren't you that Egyptian that came through and led a bunch of disciples out into the wilderness? And they went out and they died, 1,000 or something like that. That's what the gypsies were known for, the Egyptians. They would come through and there would be this big show, right? This big carnival, this big excitement. We're on to new exciting things, and forget about all this old stuff. We've got this new exciting thing that we want you to be a part of. And we're promising you all kinds of stuff, all kinds of great experiences, all kinds of neat things. And I alone have this. This is some draw disciples after himself. I alone have the key to these little insights. And people are like, really? Oh, well, then they'd be just led off into this area to be destroyed. And it says, you know what? These were two fallen angels. This was the demons that you were listening to. But they drew you out, but not to God, but to join yourselves to things that you didn't even know you thought you knew. You thought you knew what you were getting into. You didn't know them. It's like getting into any very sad and, you know, sick situation. Like, what I thought this person was a good person. No, you were led astray by someone who now had evil intent upon you. So I hope you're starting to kind of see kind of where this is going. You know, with this, they did not have good intent. Satan does not have a good intent for what your life is. So let's see here. Let's see here. Is there? Let me just check some out, guys. Okay, sorry about that. Sorry, I'm just checking some things out real quick. All right.
Hi, my name is Hayo, and I just looked at my email and I saw that.
So let's go on.
Deadline has just passed.
Just be careful. I mean, here's the bottom line: is that there's so many new things that are coming around. So many come and follow me. That every con game that I knew in my upbringing, in my life, it was this idea that this is a new and fast way to make money. This is a way that you're going to build wealth very quickly. And you're led up to, just invest in this and follow us and go with this program. It's a assured program. And how many of those people in which their finances, even their relationship with flotsam and jetsam, because they were telling you to basically harvest your friends, for this pyramid scheme or whatever it is. And then and you're being led astray, and it was only to fill that person's pockets, and you're left in the basically in the wake of all of the debris that is afterwards. And that's how it is in the spiritual world. All right, so establish yourself on the rock. So, of the rock who begot you, you are unmindful and have forgotten the God who fathered you. Covenant is everything. To be within the terms of that covenant, to be within the blessing of that covenant, to be within the light that shined from the approval of the Father from this covenant. Super, super important that you work out your salvation with fear and trembling. It's like someone going through a document and they've won a lottery for $400 million or something. And they're saying, okay, you need to go over all the legal stuff because you can lose all this by foolish investment. And so when you go through it, you go through with a fine-tooth comb, because by the time you get it deposited in your account, you're vulnerable to all kinds of stuff. And so when you study the contract and all the stipulations of basically the transfer of that wealth into your account, you better know what you're doing, or you'll be worse off than if you never got that money in the first place. Look at all those stories of people that ended up getting all this money in the lottery and it ruined their lives, and then they ended up millions of dollars in debt with no way to pay it back. Tragic. So of the rock who begot you, you forgot. You're unmindful of the God who fathered you. This whole thing is about being in the house. When the Lord saw it, he spurned them because of the provocation of his sons and daughters. Nothing hurts God more. Do you think, real quick, kind of access point here, you think Jesus was hurt more by Pontius Pilate in the trial, or more hurt by the Jewish leaders that should have known? What did he say to Pontius Pilate? They are more guilty. They knew. They had access to my oracles. I communicated with them through the words of Moses. They called themselves disciples of Moses, and they were not. They called themselves sons of Abraham, they were not. Do you think that hurt him more? What do you think even hurt him more? I think literally the betrayal of Judas. Judas, who was a part of his circle, you can only hurt God if you're one of his children. I mean, really hurt him. And it was Judas, who was a part of his initial 12 foundation stones to his government. And he says, one of you is a devil. Why did Jesus keep bringing that up? Lots of times he brought up, and one of you is a devil. And I wasn't saying it because he was, into this conspiracy. He was talking out of, he's getting done talking about that he's the Messiah. He's the inheritor. Every time he gets into to conversation about the covenant and inheritance and the joy, but he says, one of you is a devil. He's saying, examine yourself. One of you is a devil. He said, this hurt him. This is what's so powerful to really lay a hold of, is the idea that this is what provokes him more than anything else. But let's move on even further. So if Pontius Pilate, and whom he even called friend at one point, didn't hurt him as much as the religious leaders of the Jews, who are more guilty, then it's him who betrayed him with kisses. The same way that Mary, it's in the plural and it's in the continual kissing. It's the language of what Mary was washing his feet. And she was continually kissing him in a way that made everyone feel very uncomfortable of this public display of affection. And she was really showing her adoration and love for him. Well, it was Judas who was the most biggest protester of that, and was he was most ashamed by her display. When Judas walks in the Garden of Gethsemane, remember the separation of the oil, the Mashiach, from him. He goes up to him and starts to kiss Christ the same way that he criticized Mary for kissing on him. The kiss of love and devotion, and I don't care what anyone thinks, public display. And he says, man, with kisses. This is how you were going to throw me to the wolves. that provokes him to pain, deep pain, deep pain. And so what causes the abomination of desolation? He says it over and over again. It is finally when the adultery is in my house. It's when the violation is not, it's bad when it's the nations. It's really bad when it's in the camp. It gets even worse when it's in the courtyard. Well, now when it's in the walls of the holy place, this is making him intense. When you bring it into the holy of holies, into the judgment, into the place of the bedroom, into the most intimate area, it's when you are cherished and you're brought into his inner circle. There was even the 12, but in there, I don't even think he was more hurt by Judas than he was by who was brought into the circle of three that represented the three persons of the Godhead. The idea of them partaking of the most intimate circle, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. You had James, John, and Peter. And Peter denied him. One of the three denied him. That. And Peter was basically kind of the father figure amongst all of them. Not too different from the Father, forsaking his Son in that way when he's up on Calvary's cross. And it caused bitter weeping. And Peter did represent that in one prophetic sense, but nothing hurt him more than that denial from Peter, than even his own. But ultimately, now to get into the ultimate circle is his own Father when he says, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. And then it gets into the place of the ultimate. Now, this is what causes the abomination. That will cause the desolation. This will cause the destruction, the entire economy of priests and sacrifices in the temple and the oblations and all of that kind of a thing. It is an abomination that will cause the desolation in this way. And he swears in his wrath. And the word wrath is the word for nostrils, right? It's the idea of passion, of what makes you breathe and flare your nostrils when you're breathing. So he swears because you've now gotten into the place in which it's the most intimate with him. It can hurt him the most. And then from there is where it's an abomination that will cause your desolation. Those who died in the wilderness and did not enter into the Canaan land was an abomination that caused their desolation. And then only 2 witnesses entered in. Hang in there, guys. These studies are so important. And I know it sounds like, man, they just talk about good gospel stuff. Wow, we need to be more and more established in this gospel. So it says, and this is the issue here. Remember, we're going in by faith into Canaan. And he said, I will hide my face from them. I will see that what their end will be. Wow, did Christ not receive this in our stead? Was he not disciplined, chastised, rejected for us? Wasn't by his stripes that we're healed? Wasn't by his counted amongst the transgressors that we have the great benefit of standing right before God? What did he say? I will hide my face from them, and I will see that what their end will be. In other words, he will see to it. He will tend over that. He will officiate over that. For they are a perverse generation, children in whom is no what? Faith, trust. This is the key. No abiding, no real confidence in him. They lost confidence. They chased other lovers, and it hurt me because I am faithful. That's the whole thing. And that's what you'll see in the prelude to the play, Revelation 15, is part of that declaration of those who are able to enter into that place where the plagues are falling, the wrath is being poured out, and they're going to be able to stand. Is what do they say? He is true and faithful. He's a true witness. And they have faith and confidence in him. And that's the idea of having faith. Total confidence in God. And he's faithful, right? So it says, and they provoked me to jealousy by what is not God. It doesn't matter if it advertises itself to be. It doesn't matter that it wants to be your God. They're false gods if it's not the living God. They provoked me to jealousy. This idea of jealousy is like, it's a jealousy that wants his object of his love and affection, adoration, he wants it back. That's the idea of it. So when you're hearing this message, it's the idea of come out, return. It's the second angel's message. It's the picture of come out of her. I want you back. He possesses you. I want you back. You're within his walls, and the idea of Babylon was a picture of being under the household of another man, of another husband. Same thing with being under the household of Pharaoh. And he smote him with plagues, smote him until Pharaoh relinquished up his bride. And so he's basically, it's a call to return to him. That's what this is. And to have faith in him for what is not God. They have moved me to anger with their foolish idols. The traveling salesman that turns out they have no life in them, but I'll provoke them to jealousy by those who are not a nation. Remember, this was being quoted real quick. This was being quoted in the book of Romans 9 through 11. And so it's this picture of, it was such a reversal, such an irony that Paul was speaking to the Gentiles as if they were the faithful Israelites and the Jews were those that were in disobedience as unfaithful, following other gods, and saying that because of your blessing and because of their discipline, I will make them see that what's the obvious thing. These people have the birthright and these people don't, and I'll provoke them to jealousy to get them to want this. And so that's what he did. All right. Let's go back. Let's look at verse 22. It says, for a fire is kindled in my anger, and shall burn to the lowest of shield of hell. And it shall consume the earth with her increase, and set on fire the foundations of the mountains. This is a monster verse. This is the abomination that causes the desolation. This is the thing that is talking about the destruction of the whole world. We obviously have not seen that yet. So this has eschatology attached to it. This is an ultimate picture. This is all about covenant. This is all about those that are in covenant. It's all about the gospel that goes out to try to call people. So what does this mean? Verse 22 is now talking about the wrath that is to come. 7 last plagues is the wrath that is to come. So all 21 verses that preceded it is a prelude. This is all really a prelude, ultimately. But he's telling you that the first 21 verses is a call. It is a 3 angels message that are calling people to come under the seal, calling people to come out of Babylon, calling people to worship him who made heaven and earth, and to enter into the marriage, to enter into the judgment, to enter into the day of atonement. This is the idea. It's a call. It's a call that's a legal summons, but it's also a heart appeal. This is not just some cold event in this way. This is a pleading God saying, in my jealousy, and that you're my portion. And he's emoting through this whole thing. So there's something very intense about what's going on here in Deuteronomy 32. This is intense. This is impacting him. The same hurtness that happened from Gethsemane all the way up to Calvary's cross. It's the same hurtness that is being described here. He is making a last plea, a last attempt, and it gets more and more escalating intensity as we get closer to that close that's shutting off. Just like I would imagine Noah's appeal to people as Methuselah was coming to his end. And it was looking like the end was coming near. I'm sure he stepped up, and there was more intensity and more passion as he's realizing, especially when the animals were now in a startling way entering into the ark, and now he's really having an intense plea. Somehow he must have been like a voice in the wilderness. And no, in this way. All right, so let's press on. All right. So verse 22 says, for a fire is kindled in my anger, shall burn to the lowest hell. It shall consume the earth with her increase, and set on fire the foundations of the mountains. This is utter deconstructing his creation in order that he may draw out his possessions out of a great fire. He's going to pull his jewels out. And it says that I will heap disasters upon them. I will spend my arrows on them. This is a perfect prelude to the 7 plagues and the wrath. They shall be wasted with hunger, devoured with pestilence and bitter destruction. I'll also send against them the teeth of beasts. So what are in the book of Revelation? What's in the book of Daniel? Beasts with teeth of iron. So this is in a kind of a global, larger sense of the word, where beasts represent powers and stuff. It won't be just animals out there. Even though what's interesting is that there were Christians literally throwing the lions at some point, but it's the idea that they're no longer under covenant protection, as in, Leviticus 26, that talks about that the wild beast will now be chasing down the flock because they don't have a protector anymore. They're not under the hem of the garment. They're not under the borders. So it says, with the poisons of serpents of the dust. Now, what is that? How would you interpret that if you were a teacher, which all of you are? How would you interpret that as a picture of great deception at the end of time? Or they're going through the journey in the wilderness, and all of a sudden the serpents start to destroy them. How would there be an application to the curse upon Satan, saying, "You all the days you'll eat dust all the days of your life, you'll crawl on your belly"? Well, it's those that have been handed over, right? Handed over to be what? The food of this serpent, and to be bound with him, and that they're under poison. Now, what's interesting is that a lot of people think that snake bites really hurt. They tend to not hurt. It's like a pinprick. Some people don't even know it, and they kind of go into a strange drunkenness or a stupor. And that's what's fascinating about the poison of asps or serpents. It kind of almost makes you feel drunk or intoxicated. And so when you're drinking from the wine, it's almost like you've been handed over to destruction, and you are given over to great delusion, just like a drunkard would. And you'll be handed over. It's almost like when Christ, they were trying to give him gall when he's up on the cross to really prepare him for his destruction. It was a kind of a strange act of mercy. Yeah. It says, the sword shall destroy outside, there will be terror within. It's interesting because Paul talked about this in the description real quick of his own Christian walk and his experiences in the sanctifying process that God brought him through. He says that there is basically sword without and terror within. And he was directly accessing this idea that I'm in covenant with God. And God uses these testings and these challenges to keep me herded into the fold, you know? And it's this idea of self-examination that happens as a constant process. So when you're going through a lot of stuff, it should be causing you greater and greater self-examination, unless you be disqualified, unless you partake of the bread to your condemnation, that you call for the blood to be splattered upon you and your children, but you did it as an act of drunken violence, and not realizing that you were calling forth accountability and culpability. So God allows a lot of trials and challenges to happen from without and from within. So we go through an examination. Am I in covenant with God? Or am I not in covenant with God? That's what's important that we do. We take, we take every crisis as an opportunity, and let no crisis be a wasted opportunity. Okay. All right. There you go. So it says that for the young man and the virgin, the nursing child with the man of gray hairs. In other words, this is young, old, high and low, and that's all language that's used. That there's going to be no respecters of persons. And we saw that in the book of Lamentations and the book of Revelation. So it says, I would have said, I will dash them in pieces, and I'll make the memory of them to cease from among men. Now, this is talking about no prodigy, no offspring, down to the root. The seeds are all destroyed. It's almost like when you're trying to kill like fleas in your house, and it takes a process, because you don't just kill the fleas. You've got to actually kill the larvae, and you've got to kill the very eggs themselves. And so this is what this is fundamentally talking about. When he's going to destroy the wickedness, he's going to destroy not just its branches, but its root. And to get down, that's so it's very extreme language. It should be a startling language to dash them in pieces, or to dash the head of the infants against the rock. That was a startling statement. That was a hyperbolic. That is to tell you something very intense about destroying the very seed of something. That it's an astonishing work. It was an astonishing thing for Pharaoh to put a death decree on the infants, right? It was very astonishing. That was a core message, that we are going to root out your very seed. It says, had I not feared the wrath of the enemy, lest their adversaries should misunderstand, lest they should say, our hand is high, and it is not the Lord who has done all this. Our hand is high. This high-handedness, this upper-handedness, this idea that had I not feared the wrath of the enemy, lest their adversaries should misunderstand, lest they should say. In other words, look at this power. It's because we're prevailing. It's not because God is using us as an instrument of discipline. And that's what it is. And so even like, real quick, I got to touch on this. You know, we see a lot of extreme statements in the scripture that talk about, hey, listen, honor the king, and that they bear not their sword in vain. It's not that everything that the government does is right, but God will use them as an instrument of discipline. He will use, and he used Babylon, he used Egypt, he used all these different, Philistia, he used all these nations, Egypt, all these nations to be as an instrument in his hands. So whatever is happening, we can just say, hey, listen, at some point, he's using, you know, he's the King of Kings, he's the Lord of the Lords. So he is taking them and using them as a threshing instrument. And they unwittingly are giving credit to themselves. That's why it says, you know, the Chaldeans, you know, they're like, you know, so excited, you know, by when God releases them on the discipline of his people. And they're empowered with this idea, and they're like unstoppable because they feel like their God is blessing them to do that they're prevailing. But God says, I'm actually the king of all those kings, and I'm using them to discipline you and to show them that it was me that used them for this strange act. I will discipline them too. This is always how the language goes in the scripture in the Old Testament. Always how the language goes. All right. So it says, for they are a nation void of counsel. It's not because he's blessing them. It's not because they're better. It says there is neither understanding in them. Counsel and understanding is basically what did the king of Israel seek? Solomon. It says, give me counsel, give me understanding, give me wisdom that I may judge. And that was always a virtue or an attribute of God's people, because he's breaking off his mind. In other words, that was the important thing, to know that you're a child of God. And the assurance you have isn't that everything's going perfect all the time, but that he's giving you his mind, his wisdom, insight into himself. So let me just put it to you kind of in a prophetic kind of a way. There are those that are going to see the judgments. We just had an eclipse. All these people on the freeway were all parked like it was a parking lot. Even the police were all saying, wow, you know, that the moon was eclipsing the sun. It was solemn. It was a freeway that's always super busy, but it was stopped. People were out there talking in these real hushed tones, saying, oh, like this. And they were taking, you know, this age of technology and postmodernism, they're all sitting there and ooh and all like a bunch of pagans, you know, that's the first time they've seen the sun darken. They're all like a bunch of chimpanzees going crazy, but they're all in this all like this big doom was about to happen. It's interesting. It says, you know, that the sun will be, you know, blotted out, the moon will turn its blood red. It says that the stars will fall. It's all these ideas, but to the wicked, these are signs of great. It's an albatross. It's the idea of impending doom. But those same signs, to God's people that have wisdom, they have an insight into the mind of God, that God at times will clothe himself in darkness, in something that is profoundly mystic, in its nature, and that Moses entered into that darkness, that Christ was cloaked in darkness, and we are to enter in into some sense, and to realize that we are under, that he can enshroud himself with these terrible things. He can endure the weight of these things, and we can have great assurance that, quote, the idea of the sun of judgment is blotted out, that the moon of guilt and condemnation, we've been washed with the blood of Christ, that the pillars of smoke and fire, that is a picture of a destroyed city to the wicked. You look back and you see that the city is destroyed, and you mourn and you weep because your great city was destroyed. God says, well, see those as clouds of pillar and clouds of smoke, that these are pillars ascending to heaven, and that you're under a great palace, and that even the cedars themselves are but pillars and, you know, bedposts, so to speak, you know, that God has made this his entire territory. And so that's wisdom, to even understand chastisement and affliction as ultimately not rejection, but as assurance that you are, just like Hebrews 12 talks about, because of that discipline, because of that, you have understanding, you have wisdom, you have what's called counsel, so to speak. So I really want you to get a hold of that. Those that are under discipline are not, they've not given up hope like Paul had when he came under his great trials. He says, you'll suffer many things for my name's sake. And so Paul took great assurance that these were the wounds of affliction that come from a child that is in covenant, right? And as strange as that might, or as ironic as that may seem, it is strangely those who have counsel and wisdom. They're not foolishly thinking that they've been rejected because they're under discipline. Hence the word disciple. It says, chapter 32, verse 29, it says, oh, that they were wise, that they understood this, that they would consider what? The end of time, the latter end, how it would play out in the end. Always looking towards the end. Everything is looking to the day, the crown of incorruption, the crown of glory, unto that day, unto the last day. Everything is a focus of the end reward, the entering the Canaan land, the presence of God, the face-to-face. Everything in this journey is an obsession with everything that culminates into a final declaration, when all things will be turned around and made right. It says, how could one chase 1,000 and two put 10,000 to flight, unless what? Their rock had sold them and the Lord had surrendered them. So all things are in the hands of God, and victory and everything else. For their rock is not like our rock. Amen. That's how you know. What is your rock? What is your rock? What is their rock? Their rock, those out of covenant with God, their rock is their wealth, their aggression, their power, their idols, their resources, their flesh, their chariots, their horses, their prowess, their ability to control outcome. It is the power of the flesh. It is glory and glam. It is all the things that make somebody great in this world. So how is our rock not like their rock? What is our rock like? Well, it looks like weakness, because it has to do with surrender, sacrifice, abiding, trust, faith. Even our enemies themselves being judges. That's why he says, well, be careful you judge not one another. That's a very huge part of being pretty obvious that you are on another rock. You're on the sand, actually. Is that you are prematurely judging, and that you're entering into the scorn. And that's what those that were condemned at Calvary's cross did. They entered into that scorn, and that scorn and betrayed really whose side they were on. That they were staying on the wrong rock. So it says, for their vine is of the vine of what? There we go. Back to Jeshurun, the Sodom, the fields of Gomorrah. Completely resting on their leaves. Completely resting on their blessings. They fell, snare, and trap. It says their grapes are the grapes of gall, and their clusters are bitter. Now, here's interesting wordplay here. It's the idea. Gall was something that didn't bite at first. It made you numb. It made you arrogant. There was sayings, kind of old ancient sayings, that when you first start to drink, you become as gentle as a lamb. And so, in other words, have a little wine for your stomach's sake. You know, it's not literal wine, but it's the idea of the sense of tasting just a little bit of the candle, keeping it watered down. You know, but the Holy Spirit, the first fruits, the portion that is an assurance for the guarantee, you know, that you get at the end. But then, as you continue drinking, you become as bold as a lion. And then you start to rage, and you start to be overly confident. And then from lion, you become as a monkey. Monkey we just think of as a fool. But here's the fascinating thing in this kind of old Jewish kind of idea of the fool. That you keep drinking wine, you keep drinking presumption, you keep drinking, going into Canaan land early and drinking of the grape of the vine. You start to assume your riches. And the idea of a monkey wasn't just the idea that monkeys are so crazy, which it is, but monkeys looked enough like man that you could almost say, well, they're like man, but they weren't man. That's the interesting thing, that they use the idea of a monkey, that they mimicked a man. They mimicked the upright, but they weren't upright. They had the appearance of a man, but they were a beast. And monkeys represent that. That's why I think even it's interesting that I think God made a creature very close to us to give us an illustration that you could mimic being a person and actually not be a person. You could look enough and be almost fascinating, and you start to attribute qualities that just aren't there. No matter what Coco or whatever decides to do, it's just not the same, even if he paints a picture. But the clusters are bitter. So their wine is as the poison of serpents. In other words, it sneaks up on you, the effects. You think, oh, I'm fine, it doesn't hurt. Cruel venom of cobras. And then it ends up destroying you, right? But it says, is this not laid up in store with me and sealed among my treasures? And that's what God's people are, right? We're his possession. And he says, I jealously guard my possession. You are precious to me. So that which is our enemy becomes his enemy. Vengeance is mine. Remember, this is being brought out in Romans. And recompense. Their foot shall slip in due time. Maybe not in our time. He has multiple purposes he's laying out. He's got a coordinated thing. For the day of their calamity is at hand. Just like it says, Book of Revelation. This idea of at hand doesn't mean it's right now, it's immediate, it's this year. But at hand is at any time the king decides. It's right there, it can happen in a moment. If he delays it, excuse me, it's nothing for you to worry about. It's at hand. It's at his hand. At the lifting of his hand or at the descent of his hand. It's something either comes to be or it's over. And so if he delays something, he has his purposes, but to trust as if it can happen at any moment, which it can, because he's already gained possession of it. That's why it talks about Revelation 1, that the time is at hand. A lot of people have presumed false theology from that idea. The things that come hasten upon them, and that will. Believe me, no matter how long something takes, when it happens, it will feel like it came too fast. For the Lord will judge his people. And judge was actually a good thing, real quick. We're almost there, guys, hang in there. That he will judge his people. Okay, here we go. Just want to touch on this. And your homework assignment for this is going to be, sorry about this, guys. It's going to be Isaiah 34, because Isaiah 34 is going to elaborate even more on this idea when he changes up the inhabitants of the land. He says, my people are going to inhabit. and he's going to melt the elements with fervent heat. And he's talking about that his sword, because later a little bit here he's going to say, you know, my glittering sword, you know. And that glittering sword is going to be his word, that when he decrees something, it's at hand. When he finally comes out and says, all right, now it's time. He says that that sword is bathed in heaven and it's thirsty. And it will not be sheathed until it is fully done doing its job of executing justice and judgment. And so it's very fascinating to understand that when the Lord, when he likens or he conjures the image of a judge to us, in our modern society, we kind of tremble. We think that's not good. But he's saying that it's good for his people. A judge restores, and he's a fair judge. So he's saying that those that are of his inheritance, they're going to restore, have whatever was lost restored. Whatever the locust of Eden, it will be restored. Whatever has been taken from Job, it will be restored double fold in that way. So when they hear the news, here comes the judge, it's a good thing for God's people. They say, finally, things are going to be restored. Things are going to be put back into their right place. And that's the kind of association he's calling for us to have. An association in which the judge is a restorer, is a champion of the people. In the book of Judges, all judges were saviors. All judges were ones that saved God's people from falling into total chaos and destruction. Because the book of Judges even said that what was the climate? Everyone did what was right in their own mind. So what saved God's people over and over and over again were the judges. They would come and they would restore justice. They would bring things back to where they should be. And that's the key. So I just want you to change your image of God being judge, because that's a good thing to those that that want to be in God's family, his people. And what will he do as judge? We have a compassionate high priest, right? That has touched the feeling of our infirmities. And on his servants, when he sees that their power is gone. What does it say, like in the 7 churches? And I think it's Smyrna. It says that though you are getting weak, I will help you. It even says in the book of Daniel, when you need help, I'll help you. When your strength is small, I'll help you. So keep those things which remain, and I will help you. I will strengthen you at the right time. When you remain in God, he will not abandon you, and he will do it exactly and mete it out perfectly. And there is no one remaining bond or free. In other words, the remnant. And he will say, well, where are their gods, right? Is this what Elijah said? The rock on which they sought refuge. That was the mockery all through the book of Isaiah. Real quick, let me just talk on this real quick. I'll get back to the text. But when you're looking at all the, quote, the gospel section of the book of Isaiah from chapter 40 on down, and you'll notice that when God goes into judgment, he will say, well, where's your idols? Where are those gods that you trusted in? There's no power. You come to find out that I alone had power. They had no life. They gave the false promise of life. You thought that by chasing this, you would realize this great dream. I've known people that have chased massive dreams, and they've obtained them, and they're miserable. They feel like that they've abandoned, that they don't even have a soul anymore. A lot of times we're chasing something, it's like we're really so close to getting it, and even when we, quote, do get it, the whole thing was a complete ripoff. What are you going to do with piles and piles of money, but you have no soul, no being, no relationship with God? You've become completely something that you wouldn't even like if you had to hang out with you. That's why some of the richest people in the world, stuck in traffic, are the most miserable people in the world, because they got to actually live with themselves for 15 minutes, sitting there in their very expensive $55,000 car. So at that time, he's trying to get you to say, where are they now? Now, why is he saying this stuff? Just to mock them? No. He's doing that as a precursor. He's giving a preview of that moment for us now, so we can make a decision that we won't regret later on. He's just trying to get us to think and to understand what you're going to go through in that moment. And you're going to say, what in the world was I trusting in? I so regret it. I sought refuge and I'm naked. The irony, the irony, the irony. Yes, this is the prelude to the place, guys. This is the Song of Moses. So we need to go through these things and kind of cherish them. Who ate the fat of their sacrifices and drink the wine of their drink offering. Let them rise and help you and be your refuge. This is what he's trying to do right now. You guys, you're going to regret it. On that day, they weren't a refuge. You couldn't hide. You couldn't rest. They weren't a sanctuary. They can't cover you. Because God, at some point, this is what's so powerful to understand. And a lot of people won't get this. When he comes in the clouds of glory, like everyone look at the eclipse, he exposes everything. He takes the covering off of everything. And it says that the wicked are going to want to hide in the caves and they want the rocks to fall upon them, but he says no. In the Old Testament prophets, from Isaiah to Jeremiah to Ezekiel, says you're going to want to hide on that day, but you're going to be, it's the idea of the noonday sun. And there's no shadow. There's no shadow of turning. There's no hiding. There's nowhere to go. There's no tree to save you. Remember that Jonah ended up having that gourd, and that was a shade for him. He says on that day that he'll get the cutter worm, cut all of our refuge away, and we're just going to stand on the grand flat plain. There's nowhere to go. And all we have is an atonement to account for. And all the words and all of our thoughts and all the things that we've thought, well, that's in the past, and I forgot about those things, and I put those things out of my mind. God says, but why didn't you let me atone for those things? Why didn't you let me cover those things? Why didn't you let me wash those things away? Why did you let them remain? Why did you leave them crying out as innocent blood that was shed, screaming out in testimony, pointing at you, saying, guilty, guilty, guilty? We'll be condemned by our own conscience on that day. He says, will they rise up? No, you will have only what? Yourself to blame. And that whatever you obtained when you finally caught up to your idols or caught up to your love or whatever, that he turned out to be a false promise or he couldn't deliver. That's the reality, is that the satisfaction won't be there. It'll turn out to be as gravel to your teeth. It'll be stolen bread. And it'll be without its satisfaction. There will be no covering. You'll be as if you're out in the hot sun. There's nowhere to go in that moment. So it says, now see that I, even I, now this is actually what gives him the name Yahweh. It's this idea that even I am he. Remember? I am he is all through Christ's language. Whom do you see? Jesus of Nazareth. I am he. I am that I am. What does this mean? It's the concept of being Yahweh. There is no God beside me. This was unique to God alone, to the God, to the eternal one. All other gods called themselves Baal. Well, so did God. That means husband. Or Molech. That means messenger or king. You know what? So God says, I'm a Molech. I am a Molech Melchizedek. In other words, a righteous Molech. In other words, I am a righteous messenger. I'm a righteous king. If you look at ancient texts, you will see that they call themselves El or Elohims, which means powerful ones, mighty ones. They call themselves Adonai. You know, these are high, lifted up ones. But no one dared call themselves Yahweh. And that's what Yahweh is. And what does this mean? There's no God beside me. This is the concept of Yahweh right here. You ready for it? You want to know what Yahweh means? I kill, I make alive. I wound and I heal. Nor is there any who can deliver from my hand. Then you shall know that I am Yahweh. That you cannot escape it. The concept for Yahweh, I'll make it real simple. You're going to see that this was the one that came into covenant and lifted up his hand and entered into an oath. This is Christ, who is called the angel of the Lord, the angel of Yahweh, the present manifest glory of God. The one we can look upon and not be destroyed was Christ. And when it's fascinating to understand that when God presents himself, he presents himself as one who can kill the other gods. He's the God killer. He's the one that can kill the fallen angels that you can do nothing about. You cannot have power over Satan. But he has power over that Elohim, that mighty, powerful one. He alone. And he says he has the ultimate capital decree. So much so that he can even resurrect those that are dead and bring them back to life and make them account, even though they were hidden in Sheol, a place that you cannot recover anything from, the black hole, the Death Star, the imploded supernova, in which all matter and light is consumed and deconstructed into dark matter. Well, he says, I can bring them out of that and reconstitute them and let them not miss a beat in their thought, and they'll be standing before me as if they never entered into Sheol, and I will bring them up and there'll be nowhere to hide. This is where he mocks the grave and he mocks death in this way. This is like his prerogative, but he alone can do this. Satan can't mock death. He could bring you under the power of death. He could bring you under the seduction in which you'll receive the reward of death. But he cannot say that he rules that place where he can annul death. He can't do that. And so Yahweh is the idea of a God that sucks in and a God that breathes out. It's the fundamental, simple, childlike notion of life. If you could breathe in and out, you're living. All children can understand that. Always breathing in and out. Well, how do you know Grandma was dead? She wasn't breathing in and out anymore. Okay, well, it's super simple. Yahweh is that idea. God has his own life. And with that life, he can either take a life and he can give a life. He is that life. He is the one that is the author of life. He's the beginning, the end, the first, the last. Everything is constituted within his covenant. And then things are deconstituted when you're out of covenant and he decides to call you on being outside the covenant. You've lost life. It is the total ultimate trump card, these guys. So he's just trying to say that I kill, I make alive. I wound, I heal. This is what he did up on Calvary's cross. He killed, he made alive. He wounded, he healed. Christ was there to show that he is Yahweh. This is huge to understand, that he didn't say, I have resurrection and I have life. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. I'm Yahweh. All of the ultimate reality. If you want to base reality on what's happening to your neurons and what's happening to your dendrites, and you want to say, well, my axion, though, my perceptions of life, how I feel, what my experiences are, my truth isn't a truth whatsoever. You do not have Yahweh disposition. You do not make alive. You do not kill. You do not heal, and you do not wound. Not in the way that God does, where he can look upon a grave and he can call forth that being from the grave. Satan cannot call a single person from the grave. That's the truth. And what the remnant are going to find at the end of time, there's not a single person that will be slain that God does not will to be slain. He cannot annul. When God puts a seal on those people, they are to be an offering of life, to be alive when he comes in, to go through a process as a wave offering, as a grain offering. And Satan is doing everything to execute the death decree. He will be rendered powerless at every single stage. And even though the righteous, though, are under great testing and humility and crying out day and night, he is showing himself that that they're without power. And it's hard for us to get, because at every new situation, just like Elijah, when he killed the 450 prophets of Baal, then afterwards, he now enters into a place of thinking, oh, wait, but Jezebel has now put a death decree on me. And wow, and so got ramped up. So that's where he broke and freaked out and says, listen, I don't want to live now. And so that's what the remnant will be going through. They'll be kind of like the Elijah experience in that way. They'll see great blessing, great outpouring of the latter rain. But then as they see the death decree ramping up, it doesn't build your confidence. In fact, the idea is it kind of boils you down to a very broken place. Just how it rolls, folks. That's what we need to learn. All right, we're getting down to the last part. So it says, because of this reality of who he is, he could raise his hand and make an oath to heaven. That's in Revelation chapter 10, right? And say, as I live forever, and here it is. This is your homework assignment. It's going to be in reference to what you're going to read here. You're going to read Isaiah 34, talking about the sword bathed in heaven. If I whet my glittering sword, and my hand takes a hold on judgment, I will render vengeance to my enemies. There comes a point where he divides his friends from his enemies, to adversaries to friends, or members of his household, family members to non-family, to strangers. And I'll repay those who hate me. This was not about those who hate you, folks. This is about those who ultimately hate the God that you're in covenant with. And there is an unanalyzed war that is in their heart. You give yourself to Christ, and all of a sudden people that were your friends are now avoiding you. They see you as a whatever, this detestable thing. You will know that you cannot take it personal. This is about in whom, and you should take comfort from that. Why? Because you better not. Okay, how do I say this? You better change your attitude that you want to be seen for not who you are in yourself. Okay, that's an indication. That is the whole process of imputation. If you want to have somebody's righteousness imputed to you, you want your sins imputed to him. You don't want to be seen for who you are in yourself. You don't want your innate self to be the reason why you're treated. You want to be treated according to who you are in Christ, in your Goel, in your advocate, in your kinsman redeemer. And he says, because you are not being treated according to who you are, like in this world, let's say, how about being a good person, being sanctified, being someone who's been selfless and loving? What if you're killed by the very gang members that you're ministering to? Or let's say you're feeding the homeless and then they poison your bowl of soup. But all I did was do good things to these people. Well, he says, well, take that as an indication that you're not obviously being true. You take comfort in some strange way that you're under the experience of what's called imputation. In other words, as he was up on Calvary, he wasn't treated to who he was in himself. Good for you. Even though at the time it was a bitter cup for him. The same thing, going through that bitter cup at the time, but isn't that giving you a message that, no, the very people you are blessing and being good to and ministering to, they're treating you not according to how you've been treating them or who you are to them. They're treating you to who they are calling their enemy, not you. I mean, you're obviously the recipient, but you can take it personal, but it says don't take it personal. They're my enemies. And I've taken up your cause as my cause. I'm jealous for you. You're the apple of my eye. You are my possession, my portion, my special treasure. And I bound you up and sealed you up as if they're doing it unto you, they're doing it unto me. Just like if Satan is coming with your sins at the court case, those are my sins. I bought them. I own them. And I paid the price for them. That's what we want. That's what the judgment does. Is it shifts the transfer. So I see ministries now that do everything they can to take away the concept of the transfer of sin and the transfer of righteousness. And I've met Dennis Prevey and 100 other people are completely at war with the concept of the transfer of sin and the transfer of righteousness. But that is your assurance in your life. Make no mistake about it. Let's finish up what we did, guys. It says, I will make my arrows drunk with blood, and my sword shall devour flesh, and with the blood of the slain and the captives from the heads of the leaders of the enemy. Wow. What is this talking about here? Drunk with the idea of even drunkenness is like taking things to excess. That's the idea of drunkenness. Even like literally caught in a moment. And no one can reason with you. This is what it's basically talking about. Because it's drunk, you can't reason with, right? So this is like, you can't bargain your way out of this. My arrows drunk with blood. They will find their target. They will, this is something you can't reason with. You cannot bargain and negotiate away. What's really sad is a lot of people actually have fully relied, and I worked with enough teenagers and kids and people and human beings and dealt with human beings that they always feel like that the only skill I really need in this life is to be able to talk my way out of something. Because I'm dead confident that if I'm ever met with someone who's going to exact justice, I can always talk my way out of it. And then so I'm going to reason with that. I'm going to play with facts. I'm going to, at that moment, play my little games. But God's saying, I'll be unreasonable at that time. You won't be able to negotiate with me. You won't be able to reason with me. Say, wait a minute, let's not be hasty. I will be completely like a drunkard. You won't be able to hear me. I won't hear you. This is serious. He's telling you something pretty serious. But why would he be drunk? Well, this is the mating season for the birds and stuff. Remember I was telling you they eat those berries that make them drunk? Well, it's the mating season. It's the time he's going to see his bride. He's drunk. He's now jealous. He wants her. He's already put all the names in the registry. They're on the Lamb's Book of Life. So he says, well, I'm already starting to smell the smells of the Canaan land. I'm already drunk with my wedding vows. I'm ready to bring her up into the wedding chamber, into the city of Yehud, into that special place I've gone to make for her. And I'm ready to come and get her and to make her one with me. He desires to have the veil lifted up and to be in his presence. All right, guys. So it says, rejoice, O Gentiles, O nations, O masses of people, with his people. In other words, he's a light unto the whole world, right? Let's see, the Dead Sea Scroll fragments adds, and let all the gods or the angels worship him, which came where we get Hebrews 1:6. All right, let all the messengers worship him. But this is a time in which what? He's drunk because he's going to join. And you'll see here as you get into chapter 33 real quick. I won't go there, but I want you to go there at one point because of what you're going to see. I'm sorry, I'm just going to touch on this real quick. Is that he calls his angels the saints, and he calls his human people that are in covenant his saints. And so one verse, I think it's verse 2, he's referring to the tens of thousands and thousands of the angels that are coming from, Christ is coming on Mount Sinai, and all these angels are with him. And that's the angel party. That's why it's called Mechanayim. And then you have the human party represented by Moses and Aaron. And they're all making their way up, and he calls them saints. So he's using the same word, Kodesh, where you get the word like Kadesh, Kodesh, the holy ones, the righteous ones, those that are in covenant, those that have entered into the wilderness, and he covers them with his white robe and distinguishes them. In other words, it's the idea they're in the cloud. And that's the idea of the cloud, that he's not going to distinguish between himself and them. He's going to, the idea of his glory being this cloud, it comes in the cloud. It's the idea that he is now going to indistinguish everybody. And that's a very powerful image to what does clouds do. They especially like fog and stuff, they indistinguish things. They kind of blend everything together. That's why mysticism, we're warned against it because it just blends everything together and indistinguishes things. But there is a context, or is a time where God says, when he's now going to culminate, or he's going to execute our status, that he's going to say that he's going to treat us as if we're one of the angels. He's going to indistinguish us from the angels. That's why he says you don't know the scriptures, know the power of God. They're going to be like the angels. You're going to be in the same family. They're going to be your brothers. We're all going to be a family. Our family's going to be together. So you have the Kodesh, the angel party, and then you have the rebellious human party that are coming into terms of peace with God. And it's Christ that's sitting there saying, I will be the blood that will be shed that will cause peace between heaven and earth. And so it's the idea of two parties are reconciling. The Mechanayim, that you'll see all through scripture, is the idea of two parties are reconciling. So they'll call a place like Mechanayim when two brothers reconcile. Let's say you have an Esau and a Jacob. Let's say that you will have Joseph's brother and Joseph. Let's say that you have the prodigal son and the father. They always fall on the neck. And the idea of falling on the neck was an act of severity at wartime, that you would what? Crush your enemy by falling on their neck. So when it says that they fell on their neck and wept, that all repentance and all love and all forgiveness is an act of severity. This is severe. You say, I can't forgive so-and-so. Well, you're not severe enough. You're not forgiving severely, radically enough. The idea of having salt during a peace offering or a peace meal is the idea that salt stops the declension and the corruption and the corrosiveness in a severe way. It just stops the whole process right then and there. However far this has gone, it goes no further. It's a severe thing. So falling on the neck, it's a severe thing. Bringing the angel party and bringing the human party together, it caused a very severe thing. If you don't think Calvary was severe, you have no idea what happened up there. You have no idea what happened or what it cost God. It was severe, super severe, so severe we're going to spend all of eternity trying to kind of get a grasp of the severity of his forgiveness, the severity of the cost of Calvary, so God can look upon us with favor and shine his face and to look at us as only begotten, dearly beloved, in whom he is well pleased. And that's the access we have. That's why it's saying, oh, Gentiles, with his people. It's this idea that this is the light. This is the one that all parties can come and find reconciliation with God. I hope that's making sense to you, because that's the everlasting gospel. All right. Rejoice, O Gentiles, with his people, Mechanayim, two parties resolved. That's why Christ brought up so many parables. Amen. And that's why he brought up so many parables of like the Good Samaritan. Like, who's your neighbor? You are to be reconcilers of strangers. You are to bring strangers within the gates. You are to break down the middle wall of partition. And he's not just talking about, compromise. He's just talking about bringing people into the covenant, that they may partake of the covenant you have partook of. That's all evangelism, all soul winning. It's a very severe reality, right? Paul lived a very severe life, trust me. Rejoice, O Gentiles, with his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants and render vengeance to his adversaries. He will provide what? This is the day of atonement for his land and for his people. For the land, that will happen when he comes and melts the elements with fervent heat by his very presence. He will turn it, as Malachi chapter 4 says, into an oven that will burn and turn the wicked into ashes. In that way, it's very severe. The atonement has a lot of severity to it. It's severe. It's intense everything. It is absolutely concentrated orange juice, and you're trying to drink it by the gallons. So Moses came with Joshua, the son of Nun, and spoke. This is the end of the song. That's where we're going to finish up, guys. Joshua. Who does Joshua represent? The captain of the Lord's host going to Canaan. And this is the name of Christ, right? I'm sure when they were speaking Hebrew in first century Israel, that they were saying Yeshua. So Joshua is representing who? Christ. So Joshua takes the place of Moses, but he does so as the captain of the Lord's hosts, right? The captain of the Lord's hosts. So when Joshua went into the Canaan land, and he's just about to go to battle at Jericho, they were already at Gilgal. That's the place where they rally. That's the place where they make covenant. That's the place where they just entered into the land, and they go to Gilgal. And Galal, it's the idea of a circle. You're in covenant. Remember that idea of circle, circumcision, circle. You go round and round and round and round. A wife circles her husband 7 times. It's the idea of protecting him and being his helpmate, his protector, his guardian in that way. So it's a circle. So they go to Gilgal, like even Gentile. It's Gagal. It's the idea of Goyim. It's around and round in circles, right? So they go to Gilgal, and then right before Joshua goes into war, and they're starting the act of circumcision, in other words, bringing the walls down to a circled city, the idea of circumcision, Christ meets Joshua, and then Joshua says, okay, are you with us or for us? Now, that was the role of Christ. Christ is a with us or for us kind of from the moment. You're either with heaven or you're against heaven, right? Very severe in that way. But he goes to Joshua and says, wait a minute, Joshua, are you with me? Or who are you with? I'm the real captain of the Lord's host. And you're right. When Christ is at war, he is named Michael. It is his warrior name. That's the best way to put it. It's not a different person than Jesus. It's not Jesus now, he's a created being. When he's the angel of the Lord and he is at war and he's the captain of the Lord's host, when he is in the role of war, it's always Michael. Why? Because it means who is like unto God. Nobody can war like Christ. When he wars, he has tactics and techniques, he has strategies and resources that no army has. He uses very strange means. When he tells Solomon, do not accumulate chariots and horses. Why? And when he tells David not to number the people, why? Because that's not the means. He doesn't use conventional warfare. He is asymmetric in what he does. And then when he decides to do something, nobody can stop him. It is an absolutely impossibility. He will use what he calls his hosts. He's the Lord of the host. What does that mean? Sorry, let me show you my face instead of just look at the text. He's the captain of the Lord's host. But he says that when he made everything, they were his host. The sky was his host. The sun, the stars were his host. The animals are his host. The bugs are his host. The bees, the fleas, the lice are his hosts. The hail is his hosts, right? The rivers and the waters are his hosts. You can't fight God. Who is like unto God? Who can make war against him? That's why that's Satan trying to act like Christ by saying who can make war against him. That's why he works as Leviathan in the hidden waters, moving through mediums and various things. He's trying to be like unto God. That's what Satan tries to do. He tries to mimic God. So that's how he does his version of being a kind of a Michael, is that he hides behind mediums and he works through Pharaoh and he works through Nebuchadnezzar and he works through magicians and false teachers and he hides himself very successful. That's why what showed Christ's divinity is that even when he was hiding and working through the fear and paranoia of Peter, that Christ chastens Satan and goes right past the medium and goes right to the source. He wasn't fooled because he knows the weapons of his warfare. He's trying to appeal to Christ's fear of death. The idea that death is repugnant, that everything in this nature recoils from going to Jerusalem and seeing its hypocrisy and seeing its leaders to be a nest of vipers, right? A den of thieves, you know, to be a place in which there is outrageous hypocrisy, very wonderfully veiled, you know, with beautiful pristine robes of dignity and grandeur. And he's going to go there, and then the idea that he is the Prince of Life, and he's going to recoil from the very what? The wages of sin. Does he have sin in himself? No. That's why he recoiled more than any one of us, because of his purity, because of his innocence. His nature recoiled from that idea, but because there was a love that was set before him, the object of that price, he swallowed that horrible obstacle to him. And so who was Satan doing? He's trying to be his own type of Michael by working through one of his disciples, trying to use covert tactics. And Christ saw him come and says, I rebuke you. And then one of his chief disciples says, get thee behind me. Peter, you don't speak as God, you speak as men speak. Peter was kind of wounded by the whole thing, but it's the idea that he's Michael. And he battles and he wars in his own peculiar way. And he does it with that infinite vision of, he sees the entire array of things. He sees the entire scope of the myriads that are there. We don't see it, right? We can't see it. We have the eyes of flesh, but he can see it. And so his tactics are never our tactics. When he looked upon the plight of humanity and saw the war that we were entrenched in and that we were at peace with it, and we had expectations of him delivering through military means or through taking the yoke of the Romans off of them, doing it as they had expected. And he came as a weak and lowly, humble, homeless man that come wandering into the presence of John the Baptist at a muddy river. And then he says, yeah, my plan is to go and die. And they said, oh, no, this cannot be. And in fact, John refers to him as a lamb. You're going to war with a lamb. You're going to fight all these wild beasts with a lamb. He says, yeah, that's my tactic. That's That's my strategy. I'm going to take the weak things. I'm going to take the humble. I'm going to take the despised. And I'm going to use that as my jawbone to take down the Philistines. And Michael, who is like him? All right. He's the true captain of the Lord's house. Let's finish up what we're doing here. Because he finished the song and he turns to Joshua, right? His new captain of the Lord's host. And spoke all the words of this song of Moses. In the hearing of the people, Shema. Moses finished speaking all the words to all of Israel, and he said to them, set your hearts. Now, this is the whole point. You know, I don't want you to miss this. The entire prelude to the plagues are what? It is a Shema. It is a listen. And to do what? To set your... Let's make this a little smaller. To set your hearts on all the words which I do testify. This is an indictment. This is a summons. The everlasting gospel is one who is the ambassador of the deed and the covenant that I will set among you what? Today. Today, if you hear his voice, harden not your heart. I tell you, today you shall be with me in paradise. This is the covenantal reality right here. Today, self-same day, and God records the covenant you make today. And that's what you should be doing right now. Which you shall command your children to be what? Careful to observe all the words of this law. For it is not a futile or a small or empty thing for you, because, are you ready for this? One of the greatest verses in all the world, because it is your life. It is not a futile or an empty thing for you, because it is your life. Harden not your heart, as in the day of rebellion. Later, I'll do it later. It's not convenient now. And by this word, you shall do what? Prolong your days in the land. It's representational of the Canaan land, you guys, of the eternal. It's talking about eternal life. Prolonging your days isn't just talking about, oh yeah, I live to be ripe old age, blah, blah, blah. It's sign language. It's language. They were participating in a parable. And when they entered into the Canaan land, it's talking about prolonging the days of your life was representational of you having eternal life. Which you what? Cross over the Jordan to possess. Real quick. I have a kind of a personal, interesting story. I was working mental health in Santa Clara County. There was one other Christian that was there. Everyone else was non-Christian, anti-Christianity. But there was a lady who worked down at the office. Her name was Bev. And Bev was a 6'1" woman that used to play drums in a country band. Her and her husband, who was like 6'6" or something, 6'7", Native American guy. And he had died. Well, he got cancer. They gave their lives to Christ, and she became a Pentecostal type. But man, I don't know. I mean, she was humble. She was humble and bold at the same time. And I believe her faith was very genuine. Well, interesting about Bev, she, as humble as she was also like Deborah. She was a Deborah, definitely of the scriptures. And she's the only Christian in her family. And her mother was dying and getting senile. And the family and people were literally physically abusing her, taking her money. They were totally messing with her. She had to drive all the way up to Oregon and basically kind of kidnap her mother and snatch her out of her place in the middle of the night. Bev takes her to her home in her apartment, sets up a hospital bed, and everything that she needed there, like spent all of her money to make sure that her mother had a comfortable place to pass, because she was dying. She was literally dying. She carries her mother, brings her mother in the car, and snatches her and drives her all the way down to San Jose, California. And then had already had the hospital bed set up, had everything, had the machines, had the IVs, I mean, had an in-home nurse and all this other kind of stuff. And Bev would come to work, and I would talk to Bev, hey, how's your mom doing? You know, but her mother was completely senile and talking nothing. And then Bev would sing to her because Bev was a singer. She sang and stuff like this. And then says about, so one day Bev came to work and I said, well, hey, Bev, how's your mom doing? Because it was all this drama. Her family's trying to get Bev arrested and it's all this drama. But she was staying in the Lord. She was staying humble. She was staying faithful. And she was totally enduring a war against her. And she was fighting for her mother to stay there. They wanted to take her, abuse her, and get Bev out of the will and all this crazy stuff, okay? But Bev was just staying strong. She could care less about any money in the will. She just wanted her mother. And so when she had opportunity, she would minister. Her mom would have these little lucid moments every once in a great while, and she would minister Christ to her mother. And so Bev came to work one morning. I said, hey, Bev, how you doing? How's your mom doing? She said, well, she passed away last night. Oh, wow, I'm really sorry. She said, but it was the most interesting thing. Because Bev would be staying up with her mom all through the night, and she'd be sitting in the chair, and she'd fall asleep in the chair, and she's right there with her mom, holding her mom's hand and stuff like that. Every night. Whole family at war with Bev, lawyers, police would come over, Bev would chase them away saying, hey, no, this is the situation. Just in battle. And all Bev wanted is for her mother to have a peaceful end of her life. So Dave, you know, it's interesting last night. About 2 o'clock in the morning, I heard my mom say, Bev? Bev? I said, she says, yes, Mom. And she says, how will I cross the Jordan? And Bev just says, band of angels coming after you, coming forth to carry you home. She says, my mother went to sleep. She's resting in Jesus. And those angels, in Revelation 14, will come and bring her home. So let's go back to our verses. By this word you shall prolong your days in the land which you cross the Jordan to possess. Gotta cross the Jordan. Gotta cross the Jordan. Today harden not your hearts, as in the day of rebellion. Right? And the Lord spake to Moses and said, this very same day, saying, self-same day, go up to this mountain of Abarim, Mount Nebo, which is at the land. In other words, I'll give you a view. Cross the Jordan, view the land of Canaan, which I'll give to the children of Israel as a possession. And you will have to taste the sting of death on the mountain which you ascend. Be gathered to your people, just as Aaron, your brother, died on Mount Hor, was gathered to his people. Where were they gathered? To the dust of the earth, folks, not into heaven. Because you trespassed against me among the children of Israel at the water of Meribah Kodesh, in the wilderness of Zin, because you did not hallow me in the midst of the children of Israel. Yet you shall see the land before you. See it as afar off, right? Even if we were to be cut down in death and slain during a great time of trouble or whatever the situation is, we see it as a land afar off. though you shall not go there into the land which I'm giving the children of Israel. So the question being, why did he get a special resurrection? Well, I believe that was assurance to all of us that, yeah, there will be many people that will have sinned against the Lord and repented, and to not lose hope, that the land afar off is very real, and that it is but a temporary sting, the sting of death, that he swallows up death in the grave. And he has had victory over that. And Moses was assurance as a first fruit of that victory. And that, as you know, what they used to say, where the teacher goes, there goes the student. And where Moses goes, as a picture of the resurrection, so we will go. He's the first fruit in that way. All right. So, quick homework assignment here is, let me go to your homework assignment that I won't be doing right now. I want you guys to do it, but this is Isaiah 34, and it's short. It's not a ton of verses. This is actually taking you through that Song of Moses, but he's giving his prophetic commentary. So if you want a commentary on it, this is a great commentary. He is giving this indictment, but through an Isaiah style. He's saying, come near, you nations, to hear, Shema, just like the whole thing started before, and heed, you people, let the earth hear, and all that is in it, the word, the world, and all the things that come forth from it. You see, he's kind of given his version, and so you're going to catch some extra juicy insights because this is a prophet, right? And he's giving his prophetic contribution. He says, for the indignation of the Lord is against all the nations, his fury is against all their armies, he will utterly destroy them. He has given them over to slaughter. The slain shall be thrown out. This is all the language, right? The sword that is, wet and thirsty for blood. Their stench shall rise from their corpses. The mountains shall be melted with their blood. Wow. All the host of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled like a scroll. Does this sound familiar? And all their hosts shall fall down. Every knee shall bow, right? The leaf falls from the vine, as the fruit falling from the fig trees. For my sword shall be bathed in heaven. Indeed, it shall come down on Edom. Who was Edom? Esau. Those that once had the birthright, and they lightly esteemed it. Lightly esteemed it. Go back to what we just studied. They had lost it, became enemies of God's people. Now the people of my curse for judgment. The sword of the Lord is filled with blood. It is made overflowing with fatness. See how he's using this language here? He's only accessing, that's what John does. They're only accessing the writing of Moses. All the prophets always access the writing of Moses. If you want to get down to the etymology of what Revelation is talking about, ultimately it's Christ. But it was Christ who made himself known to Moses. The sword of the Lord is filled with blood. It is made overflowing with fatness, the blood of rams, goats, kidneys of rams. This is the Lord that has a sacrifice in Bozrah, great slaughter in the land of Edom. Edom is a place that was once talking about God's people. It's an abomination that causes the desolation. So remember, it talks about the bulls of Bashan and everything else. The wild oxen come down there, the young bulls, the mighty bulls. It's just absolutely going through this execution of the covenant for the day of the Lord's vengeance, the year of recompense. Its streams shall be turned into pitch, and its dust into brimstone. It's the elements melting with fervent heat, right? Shall not be quenched day nor night, that smoke shall ascend forever from generation. That's why when people says, well, it's talking about that the smoke of their torment ascends forever, that means that they're tormenting forever. No, this was just the language of that covenant where he separates and destroys. And then he bequeaths the covenant on those that are his children. Generation shall lie waste. And guess what? No one will be there, folks. There's not going to be burning people forever and ever. It is the final destruction of the powers of this earth. And then when it talks about the pelican, the porcupine, the owl, the raven, you see, I want you guys to literally go I would say to the blue letter, go to King James Version. And then what you're going to want to do is actually look at these words individually. And you will see that they're using animals to describe darkness, trembling, rattling that's going on. It's the picture of the deconstructed earth in which it is the prison house. The raven is blackness. And you will see that this is this horrible, terrible, terrible place after the destruction. And he's using these animals to characterize the horrors of that prison for 1,000 years. And he'll stretch out over it in a line of confusion and the stones of emptiness. It's a measuring time. It's very fascinating. And then it says, they shall call its nobles to the kingdom, but none shall be there, and its princes. In other words, they shall be as nothing. They're all dead in the grave, folks. So it goes on and on. But I want you to go through, your homework is also going to be to look at the names of these animals, the jackals, the ostriches. It's describing the climate and describing it in kind of picture form or animal form. It kind of characterizes. So that's going to be your homework, is to go through and see the wild beasts of the desert, meet the jackals, the wild goat shall bleat out to its companion. Check out all these animals, just characterizing. If you want to know what the earth is going to be like for 1,000 years, it's going to be characterized under these animal names, right? So it's very short. It says, search from the book of the Lord. This was that covenant that we were talking about, and read. And guess what? Not one of these shall fail. Not one shall lack her mate. My mouth has commanded it. Man, he's executing his decree. And the Spirit has gathered them. Trust me, this has everything to do with the third angel's message. And he shall cast the lot for them. Is this talking at all about the Day of Atonement where he casts lots? And his hand has divided it with them, with the measuring line, the Day of Atonement, where he's separating. They shall possess it forever, from generation to generation. They shall dwell in it. In other words, when he restores it into a new heaven and new earth. All right, you guys. I want to thank you for your time. Again, we did our kind of typical 2.5 to 3 hours. I spoke a little softer, a little lower, just because I'm in public. I don't think you guys, yeah, this is where I am. But here, in fact, what I could do. All right. See here. Excuse me. This is where I'm at.
Stepping on so many toes.
So there's just a lot of folks around and all that. In fact, what's interesting is that this place, they have shows here with these death metal bands, Satan worship bands, and then I come here and I do ministry. I talk to people here that are really into that whole scene. So keep me in prayer. All right, you guys. God bless you. Stay in touch. Please keep me in prayer as much as you could think, because you know, I just like you. I go through the challenges and the suffering and the attacks of the enemy, who hates this gospel. And just know that that's what happens when you're a bearer of this message. So anyway, guys, God bless.